All right. Hey, everybody. We should be live here. Let me just check and make sure with all of the stuff and nonsense. Looks like we've got sound. Looks like we're good. Hey, we are live here. I am joined again by Christian Szurko. Hey, Christian. Let's say hi there,
Hello.
everybody. Okay, good. Looking and sounding good. All right. Excellent. We had some false starts this morning. I was more than a little frustrated about that. I get pretty upset about that kind of thing. Because YouTube made a few back changes or something. I really don't know exactly what happened, but the at my end, something changed on how live streams are started. And as soon as I was testing, which I always do before I do a live stream, because I'm a conscientious, responsible content creator, and I want you guys to have the best experience of us. We were suddenly live. And so my sound checks were live. And I was like, what is this? So anyway, figured that out. And here we are. So, Christian, let's just go ahead and get right into it. We were going to pick kind of back up where we left off. We were talking about stuff with cult recovery and, oh, yeah, we do that. We're getting commenters in already. And somebody's mentioning to give our views on past life regression therapy. Well, we can get into that in a moment. Anyway, how you doing, Christian?
Really good.
Good, good. Well, I'm doing a lot better now that I know we're live and everything is rolling. So that makes
That's
me
why I'm
happier.
doing really good because I don't have responsibility for any of this tech stuff.
No,
It's
you're
all your
good.
fault.
You're all good. All right. Well, now we had talked quite a bit about in detail about how people come out of cult situations. You are a person, for anybody who's just newly coming into this, you are somebody who helps people come out of high control authoritarian situations or groups or cults and helps them acclimate to the real world. And you're not a therapist or a psychologist or like a licensed counselor, but you are somebody who helps people. Is that right?
Yeah, this comes up again and again, and I should clarify because I actually somebody watched one of our previous recordings and asked me, one of my clients, and asked me what was going on there. And so I just want to clarify. Um, I don't do nouns and labels, but I
Right.
do verbs. So I'm not a counselor, but I do counsel, if you see what I mean.
Yep.
Or in the words of the Killers, I've got soul, but I'm not a soldier. Um, so yes, I guess you could call what I do counseling because as a verb, I, if you like, I follow the rules. Um, as a noun, no, I'm not licensed. When I got started, there was very little back in the 70s. There was very little of any help that anyone could get that I considered something I wanted to do. Um, And I thought I was going to do this for a few years, and the rest of the world would say, hey, there's a problem here. We'll fill in and we'll do this. And then I
Right.
could sit back and do something I really wanted to do, whatever that was going to be. And by the time people actually did start filling in, I was doing this, and I'd found a way of doing it in a way that helped people and that people appreciated. And I just never moved out. So I guess you could say I'm a squatter. Um, But for those people who are wondering, well, if you're not a counselor, what are you exactly? I'm just this guy who has a lot of experience, and some of it even is relevant, and sometimes, quite a lot of the time, it seems to work. Beyond that, yeah, it's
I get
beyond that
it.
we start getting into labels.
No, of
So
course.
I hope that clarifies everything.
Of course. It's clear as mud. I wanted to no, of course. Very helpful. And here's the thing about this is that, we talk about, and I really do mean it when I talk about, getting help coming out of one of these groups and getting some professional help. Um, but what does that really consist of? Well, we're going to try different modalities. We're going to try different things. You might try this. You might try some, this kind of thing or that kind of thing or this other kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it comes down to catharsis. It comes down to talking. It comes down to working over and working out what happened to you, why it happened to you, who did what. What was the cause of this? What was the cause of that? What am I responsible for? What am I not responsible for? Where
Right.
was I victimized? Where was I not victimized? Did I victimize other people? Do I need to take responsibility for that? I mean, there's a whole list of questions you could draw up on this as terms of subject matter or things to take up, and everybody's got their own individual needs and views on their experience and their victimization, which we definitely have find common ground amongst these groups. That's kind of the whole point of what we're doing this for, is because people are victimized by this stuff. But coming out of and away from that, I don't know. How would you frame it that way?
I think that's a good starting point.
Hmm.
Um, Everybody's different, as you've already indicated. We're all different. The group, the groups are all the groups are all different, and yet using the same kinds of tactics and uh, using the same forms of manipulation, the same forms of exploitation. But they are in some way different, which is why they appeal to different people. Um, so that you know you can get two people meeting the same group and say one of them will say that's not for me, and the other one will say I've been waiting for this group all my life. But that person who didn't want group A will go off and meet group B, and it'll be like I've landed. Whereas group person the other person who went to group A wouldn't have been interested. The cosmetic outside is there to attract. The um, manipulative core is there to control. And I think that automatically means that we can talk in generalities, but then we have to say, well, what about this particular person? What about that particular group with that particular person? So, your introduction is a really great starting point because it lays out the groundwork for us.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about here, because at the end of the day, it can be a relationship,
Yeah.
one on one, and some of these controlling dynamics come into play, or it can be, part of some organized religion, or, as I'm wont to say, sports club, martial arts dojo, political group. you
Right.
know
Right.
Choose your poison as far as the subject
I've even,
matter. What's that?
yeah, I've even seen it in sales,
Yeah.
where a company selling, in my case, I saw a company that was selling pots and pans
Wow.
that was using the kind of manipulative practices to wind up their salespeople who were totally inexperienced. The same
Exactly.
kind of thing that you would see, say, at an EST meeting, an EST weekend, or something like that. They were doing the same kinds of things.
That's right.
It's
Well,
just
here we're talking about MLMs, multi-level
yeah,
marketing schemes. There's thousands of those companies now, all
mhm,
coming from this sort of 20th century phenomena of Amway, and I think
yeah,
Nutrilite was the original one. So, yeah, and that goes to the LGATs, the large group awareness trainings,
yeah,
and oh man, it just pervades
and all
all.
sorts of new age healing stuff,
Yeah.
and self awareness, and um, management training programs. There's another wheeze that you see. Um, yeah,
Wow.
it's not the content that's important with a thing like this. It's the desire to control and the use of mechanisms to manipulate.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think we're getting down to the real core of this when we say that. And that it's that people get really wrapped up in watching the kooky beliefs that somehow strike them or strike their either discord or something. Xenu, what, like, just assaults their reality, right? But then you get other guys who what, you worship Odin, what, that's insane, right? And or it could be, like I said, MLMs. Oh, you're selling this product or whatever.
Mhm.
um, what do we see as from your perspective? Because I've certainly pontificated on this at length, but what do we see from your perspective in terms of the common denominators of the groups that you are helping people with? How would you put it?
Oh boy. Okay. I would start with the part that people would tend to overlook if they just came at it fresh and didn't have any of the background that your listeners no doubt have. But
Hmm.
your audience, because they're also watching, never mind. Um, I don't get the tech. Um, but I would start with the leader.
Hmm.
And whereas if we're talking about Scientology or Nichiren Shoshu or some weird group that we recognize as a so-called cult, um, if we're looking at that, then the leader is an obvious thing. But when we're talking about, for example, selling pots and pans, or selling Amway, or selling Neutralite, or selling whatever other thing, or uh, any of that kind of thing, or if we're talking about management training, it's not so obvious that there is in fact a leader in the form of a personality who is charismatic, who is something of a hero figure to us, potentially, who has that certain something, that certain air of being the guy everybody else wants to be, the entrepreneur, the sufferer who makes the great breakthrough and the great sacrifice to so that other people can have this technology, let's call it. Um, and that person runs the whole show. It's his theater. It's his show. And he's the one that creates the group dynamic that pulls everybody else in. He's the one that gets across to a certain core of people that this is the way to live, and he uses them to contaminate the thinking of the newcomers, so that this core of people are the people that are close to him. And because you're an outsider as a newcomer, you want to be where they are.
Hmm.
And so they're your examples, they're your role models, they are in many cases your teachers or your mentors, to get you to the place where you think you're going to be closer to the leader. And they're also the people who the leader can use to discipline you if you fall short. And it may not be discipline with a stick so much as discipline with holding a carrot. So it might be that the second or third or fifth in command is the one that tells you, well, yeah, the leader couldn't give you that personal time because you did X instead of Y, and he hasn't got time to waste on that kind of thing. You're not ready to be with him yet. There's all kinds of ways that this kind of thing can play out, but it's always the leader that runs it. He creates the group mentality. The group mentality drives also how people talk. You walk into a new group, what do? You listen. You hear words you don't understand. You're really careful. Do I ask? Or do I just wait until somebody says something so I know what it means? Or are they going to hand me a 500-page dictionary and expect me to memorize it? And when that happens, then you know where you stand. Then you know, okay, I've got to learn this language. What you don't realize is the leader is using the shaping of language to shape the way you think. It's basic George Orwell, 1984. If you give people certain words that they can use and certain words they can't use, pretty soon what you're doing is giving them certain thoughts they can think and certain thoughts they can't think.
That's right. That's right.
That even goes deeper than Orwell, because then there are certain feelings you can have and certain feelings you can't have, and certain experiences, emotional or transformative experiences, what Yuval refers to as experiences of awe and fervor. Um, those experiences are shaped in that kind of a group by the leader creating this atmosphere, creating this theater where certain things can happen, certain things are unlikely to happen. And so you have this entire theater of language and group dynamic and leadership and experience that utterly convinces you this must be right. I went out with my pots and pans and I read from the script and I said the right things, and the next thing you know, they were signing up to buy my pots and pans.
Yeah.
Um, that proves it. So, you know, you
I,
see what I'm getting at
oh
here?
no, completely. I completely do.
This this becomes something that works.
Yeah,
It makes
exactly.
itself.
Exactly. It's interesting. I wonder In your experience with this, because you've been doing this for decades now, you've dealt with a lot of people coming out of a lot of different groups, and I really want to, get that experience from you because I think it is invaluable. And I'm curious and of course you're talking not to those leader people, you're talking to their, ex-followers. I
Usually.
think 100% of the time. Have you ever had a former leader?
I've had I've had somebody who was about to turn himself into a leader, and I've had a second in command,
Okay,
and I've had a third in command, and that's so far
from the
is it.
hierarchies. Okay, so now, do you think, from your experience and what you've, yeah, and what you've, talked to these people about, that these leaders bone up on how to do this? Do they study? Do they go looking to figure it out, or do they seem to, and maybe this is a false dichotomy. Maybe it's a little bit of both, or maybe it's some, of both of these things. But I'm sort of wondering how much of this is organic, is just sort of they just instinctively roll into it or figure it out along the way versus premeditatively like figuring it out. I read that, for example, Jim Jones was studying, L. Ron Hubbard and some other folks. Um, you get, not to, go too far off the beaten path here, going to Hitler, but here's a guy who practiced his preaching. I mean, for hours he spent practicing his mannerisms, his expressions, his angry tirades, the way he would talk was a practiced thing.
Mm.
Um, I wonder how much of that, bleeds over to all these various groups. What's been your experience with that?
I'd say it's mixed, and I would say you're right to point out that it might not be a clear dichotomy.
Yeah.
Um, I've run into both extremes and a lot of mixtures in the middle of different groups and different people. Um, I was a friend of mine told me a story of going back to his village after he'd been in this country for some time, going back to his village, uh, where there was a kind of a witch doctor who was becoming very oppressive to the people around the village. And my friend kind of was disturbed about this and went to visit this witch doctor who hadn't been like this previously. And he just walked in unannounced, and there he found parcels from America and recognized that they were magic tricks.
Oops.
Ooh, exactly. And I've heard reliable reports that the late Sai Baba, well, more than reports, I've seen video of him palming things and doing odd things that would be more akin to a stage in London or New York, um, than to little villages in Africa, in India. But he was palming things. He did have magical props set up around him,
Right.
and there was, yeah, it was fake.
Of
You know,
course.
now where did he get the idea to do it this way? Where did he get the props from? Did he have them manufactured? Did he buy them in? I don't know. But there was all of that kind of thing going on. So there is that extreme. At the other extreme, you have people who I think just instinctively know how to do some things. For example, cold reading. Some people just seem to know how to do. I doubt very much if the little gypsy fortune teller in the county fair that goes around every year. I'm not always sure that these people sat and studied how to do cold reading, but some people do it. Some people simply do it. Now, maybe they are what is now being called a dark empath. Um, Now there's a term for your
Ooh,
audience
that
to look up when
sounds
we're done. Yes,
creepy.
go look up. It's new research. Go look it up. You'll have fun.
Oh my.
Um, but maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's some other thing where there are just some people who instinctively tune in to the people around them at a different level than the rest of us do and pay attention, and for whatever reason turn that into a prediction or a statement of something. But they're doing it, and what they're doing can be learned. And so you get people like Darren Brown, who does
Uh-huh.
some remarkable things with cold reading,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a learned skill, and he tells you it's a learned skill. He doesn't pretend, oh, well, I just have this. Whereas you get other people who do pretend. So maybe it's that. There's a third thing that I want to say about this, and it's that the most manipulative things are the things that seem most innocent. They're the
Mm.
things that seem the most ordinary. So my hypothesis is that manipulation is the illegitimate use of legitimate means of communication.
Hmm. That's an
So,
interesting way of putting it.
well, take take Scientology. All that emphasis on language and on vocabulary and on definitions and all you can't fault that. You can't say, well, no, you should just go and make stuff up out of your head and decide that a word means whatever you want it to mean.
Mm-hmm.
Nonsense. You should know the meanings of words. You should know how grammar works. You should understand the syntax of whatever language you're speaking. But by tweaking that in certain ways, you can do things. You can do, for example, what I call word tunneling, which I find in Scientology in particular. You have a sentence, and normally every word has a field of meaning. Even the word the has a field of meaning, or or is. There's a whole field of meanings that are possible. And it's the way the words string together in a sentence that narrows you down so you know, oh, well, out of all the meanings that this word has, because of all the stuff that comes after and because of its part of speech in the sentence, it must mean this rather than all that other stuff. And you do that, and your brain just does that like that. That's what learning a language is. Your brain just goes boom. And then you get to Scientology, and Scientology says, word clear that word clear that word clear that word. And the act of word clearing habituates the brain, habituates the mind, I believe, to decentralize the role of syntax in understanding the sentence.
Hmm. That's
And now
like
the words become the issue here, and getting the exact right definition. And you can work havoc with what a sentence means by doing this kind of word tunneling where the words become independent characters that only accidentally bump into each other. And the sentence can't mean this because this word has this deep significant meaning.
Yes, I certainly did run into stuff like that while word clearing in Scientology, no question about it. You could parse a sentence apart until it almost had no meaning with all the, all the things you
Yeah.
were trying to do with it. And it's interesting because when you first enter into language and language manipulation as a thought control mechanism, and it is one of the most powerful ones, which I think is why Orwell spent so much time talking about it. Um, you'd think that Scientology's concentration on words and definitions and understanding things and even demonstrating them with little bits of stuff or with clay and all of the encyclopedias and dictionaries that they use, you would think that that would somehow be its own counter to a language manipulation model, but it's not, because as you just pointed out, what it does is it takes these tools that should be useful and helpful to you in trying to figure out what somebody is saying, and like everything in Scientology, it seems to dial it up to 11. Well, we're gonna oh you think you know what the word as means? Well, we're really gonna work you over on this one, right? And you do. You literally end up spending half of or a full course period sometimes clearing up basic grammatical terms and what they mean. And while that is in and of itself is actually not a destructive exercise to do, somehow Scientology always just seems to make it worse. And I just spent years working on this stuff, so I'm not totally, talking out my ass here. I mean, this was stuff I spent a lot of time working people over on, and sometimes you could just take stuff apart and people would walk away with the weirdest understanding of what
Yeah.
something means after word clearing it. Stuff that literally just doesn't make any sense in the first place. And this is where it gets really crazy. is you take
Mm.
phrases or expressions or ideas that Hubbard said or wrote, and then you have to parse it all down and make it make sense, because the assumption walking in, and it's an unwarranted assumption now that I sit here thinking about it, but the assumption is L. Ron Hubbard is making sense here.
Right.
So it's my job to figure out what he means by this. What and the words are he was a wordsmith, so the words are the thing that's gonna be the key to that understanding. And maybe you tell me if this might be a workable analogy for this, because we're sort of harping on this one, and I think it's an important one if we're gonna dive into like a key tool of manipulation. Hey, loaded language is right up there. I think the analogy is similar to our genes, you know. And I don't mean our Levi's genes. I mean our genes, the things that, DNA, right? The things that those little bits and pieces in our DNA strands that make up the architecture, the blueprint for who we are. Is it as simple as, well, if you parse out every single individual gene, will you then understand the person? Well, no, because it's actually more complicated than that. There's more going on than just the genes. Well, in language and in understanding concepts, there's more than just the definitions of the words to understand an idea or a thought or communication. So maybe that's a useful analogy. What do you think?
It's useful to the extent that you could say we understand genes as well as we think we do, which we don't. But
Exactly. Exactly.
starting from there,
That's right.
then yeah, as analogies go, it works. And where it especially works is that what they are finally figuring out, and it's taken a while to get there, but what they're finally figuring out is that our genetic material it works synergistically, which is to say, it doesn't just, you can't say, well, this gene does this and that gene does that. What you have to say is these genes work together in various ways, and in the working together with each other and with other things we don't yet understand, they create some certain effect this way or that way. Um, and words do the same thing.
That's right.
An even more startling example of that is there are certain very fundamentalist groups which use their scripture in this way. So, for example, you have a group that teaches that the first use of any word in their scripture is determinative for its meaning every single time you see it through the rest of the scripture. Now, that just doesn't hold in any form of human communication. That
Exactly.
doesn't make that a rule.
Right.
But if you say, well, field in this first appearance here means a plot of land between that river and that mountain, therefore, whenever it happens, that it means that same thing. No, sorry. Or death, because death meant this the first time it was used, that's what death means every single time in the rest of the book. Or consciousness, or whatever the word is. You just can't do that. Human
Exactly.
language is too complicated. It is too synergistic, not only in terms of the syntax and grammar of the sentence and the paragraph and the greater volume of the work, but in the culture.
Exactly.
Once you bring in human culture, you know, some languages like Chinese don't even make the sharp distinction between nouns and verbs that we do,
Mm.
because the context will tell you.
Right. Right.
Well,
Interesting. Interesting point.
forget about saying this word has one and only one meaning ever in the world. Oh no, not a chance.
Yeah, exactly.
All human
Exactly.
language is like that.
Let
All
me
human
tr-
language.
let me
Go
try to
ahead.
make an adjustment really fast,
Okay.
because I think the volume's a little low, and I think I can do something very, very quickly to potentially change that. So give me 5 seconds. I will be right back. Ha! Back.
What, you saw that?
You bet I did. All right, good. We'll see if that helps the broadcast at all.
Okay.
Okay, and that's what I can do. Okay, I wanted to ask you about something you brought up just now or a few minutes ago, because I think it's another area of that is worthy of exploring. You mentioned dark empath. Just quickly looking online at that, I see that is, an empath who has gone to the dark side, is using
Right?
their powers for evil rather than good. And their powers meaning there are people who seem to have a knack for or have a propensity or an inclination to connect with other people at the level of feelings and understandings and where and how they're and understand people at an emotional level, have a high level of maybe emotional intelligence, and
Or
uh-huh,
who can see other people's point of view more clearly and more
yeah,
immediately.
there we go. And okay, good, my volume's better, good, glad that helped.
Oh, good.
um okay, so um that would be an empath. Dark empath would be, because generally when we talk about empathic people or empaths, we talk about people who are, you know, connecting with people in such a way as to help them. I mean, it's sort of, I hadn't really thought about it until you brought up dark empath as like, oh yeah, here's somebody who can do that. And I've thought about this before, somebody who can do that, but then uses it manipulatively, uses it in an abusive fashion, uses that to connect
Hmm.
so that they can take advantage and start abusing people. And why not? Why wouldn't there be people who would have those kind of perceptions or abilities and then use them in a way that most of us would consider very immoral?
Hmm.
I imagine this is your, and look in framing it that way. You have these people who have this ability. Do you have to teach an empath how to be an empath? Not
No,
really. You
no.
can teach them to communicate better. You can teach them about emotions. You can teach them about psychology, and they'll probably be better. Maybe the same thing with cult leaders, in terms of a dark empath. What do you think?
Well, I brought it up as a kind of reference point, just to
Yeah.
say this is an unexplored area
Yeah.
because, as far as I know, the research I only became aware of the research today, um, by the by the good offices of John Atack sending me an email and saying, "Have you seen this yet?" Um, and I hadn't. However, on looking at what he sent, it's striking to me that this is very new research. Now, for me, coming as I do originally out of a science background, I want to see research that is replicated. I want to see research that's been checked and verified. So what we have, in my opinion, what we have here is that this is a hypothesis rather than a theory. And
Absolutely.
it's a hypothesis that really needs to be pushed because um, it's so out there in a way. It's something that it may very well be true, and it would make sense if it's true.
Hmm.
It would make sense that um, empathy plus the desire to help produces one result, one kind of personality. Empathy plus narcissism or empathy plus sadism, that's going to produce a whole different thing.
Yep.
That all that kind of thing makes sense. But that making sense isn't the same as evidence.
Exactly.
And I
Right.
want to see the evidence. So to me, it's a speculative thing. It's an interesting speculation, and it won't surprise me if it turns out to be true. And it could be fun to play with as an idea. Maybe somebody's sitting right now in Hollywood writing the script as we speak. I don't know.
Yeah.
It could be
Right.
fun.
The dark
Um,
empath. Oh, here we go.
well,
The dark empath.
oh, there you go. That's the one. Yes. Um, um, yeah. Uh, that completely threw me.
I know. I'm sorry. I threw you off
Uh,
there.
no,
Well,
it's good.
here's the thing about this. Okay, so we are constantly, and I love the language of this, which is why I keep going to it because it really has so much to do with how we look at things. So the framing, okay, the framing. I keep using this word, right? But it has so much to do with how we go about looking at a thing. I mean, this could be an enjoyable soda. My can of Coke here. It's a refreshing drink. It brings a smile to my face. Or It
You're
can
getting paid for
be
that.
the end of civilization as we know it. It's sugary drink. It's destroying our diet. It's destroying my insides. Do you know what this does to plumbing? If I mean, like this will destroy things. It burns through metal and it's going to burn through your stomach, right? So it's all a matter of framing. It's like the same thing, same object, right? So here we have cult leaders and cults and cult relationships and we're really just constantly struggling to try to understand who these people are, what motivates them, why do they act the way they do, what drives that kind of narcissistic abusive behavior. Even narcissism is a framing. It's not really like you can pull out a gene or point to some thing in their brain and go, oh, there it is right there, that's the narcissism, right? It doesn't quite work that way. It's really just a matter of explaining or putting labels on behavior. So I look at this dark empath concept and I go, oh yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense as far as trying to communicate a person who is able to sidle up to you, is able to get your confidence, is able to somehow appeal to you at an emotional level and establish trust. That's empathy, and then use that, like we said, in a dark, twisted way,
Yeah.
So from that point of view, I can kind of see it. I don't know. I don't want to be too loosey-goosey about all this stuff, but
The question then is, well, personal disclosure here. I do have questions in my own mind about how we use the word empath, empathetic, empathy.
I
think
okay.
I think that sometimes they have become a little bit trendy and
Like narcissism has.
yes, and the meaning
Yes.
tends to get a bit baggy and lose its
Yes.
ability to hold itself tight and say, no, I mean this and not that.
Right.
But allowing for that, even allowing for that, I think it would be an interesting thing if they told us, well, here we are, we've replicated and replicated and replicated, and we've changed the experimental boundaries a little bit here to see if we could falsify, and we can't falsify, and we've looked at this ambiguity in the previous testing, and we still can't falsify. Okay, it's there's a high probability here.
Yeah. It would be
surprise.
It would be nice to find ways of consistently explaining consistent behavior across these paradigms, across these different models, or across the different cults that we deal with. Getting more to how you help people and how you assist them in overcoming or recovering or reacclimating from these situations. How do you help a person to learn to reestablish or to establish trust again? I found that to be one of the biggest, most fundamental, most important problems that I had to deal with over these last many years, coming out of Scientology, was realizing the depth of the betrayal.
Yeah.
When I learned how, I mean, I've said before, I still to this day have a hard time finding words to express how deep that cut when I learned the depth of the deception of Scientology. And I can't imagine I'm alone in that. I'm sure there's nothing special about my betrayal or my sense of it. It was certainly special for me, but I'm sure everybody has those moments when they are hitting that wall of, oh my God, what have I been involved in? When they come to this truth. But then there is the long trail of recovering from that, or reestablishing, being able to create trusting relationships, loving relationships. How have you helped people with that, or how do you approach that?
It starts with an attitude. It starts with an understanding that no matter which group people have joined, no matter what the particular mechanics of the group are, people have been devalued. People they've had their self-confidence undermined. They have had the experience of being betrayed, as you say. They've had the experience of having always to meet someone else's expectations, whether they knew what those expectations were or not. And sometimes you only found out that you hadn't met those expectations when you didn't meet them and you were punished or in some way made to suffer and pay for
Hmm.
that failure. So that there is this expectation, I will be a failure in my relationships. I have to be perfect or else. All these kinds of things that go on there. Um, so my first thing is that I assume that because I know there are certain things that are practically speaking universals, my job is to create a healing relationship with the person in which all of those things are out the window. This, and I know I've mentioned this before. This is why I believe in flexi time. If you want to sit across from me 40 minutes or an hour and not speak to me, I'm not going to look at my watch and say, right, we're almost out of time now. Let's make an appointment for next time. I'm going to sit there until you feel comfortable and talk.
Right.
And if you don't feel comfortable talking, that's okay. Given what you've gone through, it's almost like, this is going to sound wrong, but I'll say it anyway. It's almost as if I deserve to be treated that way because that's all you've ever known is people, you've come out of that experience where you didn't deserve time
Oh yeah.
and you didn't count unless you were doing what you were expected to do and unless your stats were up, to put it in those terms.
Right.
So it's almost as if you need me to flip the table on that, to turn the tables on that and say, it's my turn to be at your disposal. It's my turn to let you determine the ground rules, and it's your turn to be in charge of the relationship. So if you need 40 minutes to decide whether or not you can talk to me, you need 40 minutes to decide that. If you need to talk to me for 2.5 hours, that's how long you need. If you need 15 minutes and then you've had enough, you need 15 minutes and you've had enough. It's up to me to show you that there's something else in the world besides what you went through in your group. That's where healing is going. As far as I'm concerned, that's where healing and recovery is going to take place, when you realize you have other options. So that's one of the things that I look for. And the second thing is, I look for, when you decide to talk to me, I look for listening to what you have to say and paying close attention to it, because I believe that if I listen carefully enough, you will tell me what you need me to do for you.
Oh, I think that's very true. I think that's very true.
And you may not even know you're telling me. You may not
Yeah.
even know what it is you've said. But if
Yeah.
I'm paying attention, I believe that you will tell me where it hurts, in other words, and what you're going through. And at that point, then I conform everything else I'm doing, whether I'm using some particular skill of how I question and bring information out, or whether I ask you to try doing different things. I mean, like I ask people to journal, for example. It's amazing how much of a difference that makes. Some people don't want to. Some people, they just, for whatever reason, they don't want to do that. My attitude is, if you don't want to do it, that's okay. We will find another way around it. It's my job to find the way around the obstacles, not your job.
Mm.
So
Interesting point.
all of that goes to working out how I work with individual people so that they have the experience of regaining control of their own life, even in that situation where they've come to me for help. But unlike the experience in the group where you go to the leader for help and then you are just this passive, submissive, totally obedient object that the leader does what he pleases to, or she does what she pleases to you. And that's not how this works. This works a different way. You've come to me for help. Now, we will do this as you need it, when you need it, and in the way that is most comfortable for you, so that you get used to the idea that you can control your life. And that takes us into the whole subject of boundaries, which is a big subject. Didn't used to be talked about so much, but it's an important thing to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Teaching people that they have a right to say no to people without explaining themselves, without giving excuses why, just saying no. There's a cliche that I probably heard from somebody else, but I have shamelessly stolen it and I use it regularly. No is a complete sentence. I never get tired of telling that to people. No is a complete sentence.
Nope.
You don't have to excuse yourself. You're not you're not 10 anymore. You're not 4. You don't have to say why. No is enough.
That's an
And
important lesson, actually. I want to comment on that because it took me years to figure that out. I mean, just using the word boundaries felt
mhm,
silly when I got out of Scientology. I mean, this was not as I don't know if it was as common as it is now, but this was back in what 2013, 14, right? I think 2014 is pretty much when the recovery really started for me. Mid 13, and I didn't really hit on the boundary issue personally as something that was on my radar as something like, oh, that this is something I should be paying attention to for a couple years. Because I was just an open book to everybody about everything. I was Mr. TMI, and it took a while to figure out, one, everybody doesn't care about everything that is going on in my life, and two, I don't have to give them a full status report every single time they ask me how I'm doing.
right.
Oh well, I'm blah 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 blah. It's not just fine. I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm good. It was never that. It was, oh well, I da 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 da, because they're just
Yeah.
so used to reporting on myself, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And that's
And that's not just Scientology. That's most groups.
well, exactly, because it's all about not having any boundaries. It's not having any walls. It's not having any defenses. Those are not okay. This is an area of trust.
Yeah.
You and your cult leader and the cult itself, the whole organization is supposed to be all about transparency. At least those
Mhm.
mirrors go in one direction. Those transparent, windows go in one direction. You don't get transparency, but they do. You're expected to, cough up anything and everything they ever ask at any time, and this very much includes Scientology. So yeah, so that was a real habit that I had to break, and it took a long time, and I don't know that I've still totally gotten over it, but I just wanted to reinforce what you were talking about there, because from my cult experience, it's 100% true.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where um, it can seem, when a person is learning about their boundaries, it can seem as if they're being awkward or being um, uncooperative. And I can remember from time to time, I get referrals from other people who say, well, and the thing I should say here is that you can be a very good counselor or a very good therapist and not be familiar, particularly, with what happens to people in an extremist authoritarian sect,
That's right.
because it doesn't get taught very much. There is one place I know of where it's taught systematically and regularly, and that's here in this country at the University of Salford. Um,
Then you're in
and
the
it's a new
UK.
program.
You're in the UK.
Yes, sorry, I should say
Yeah.
that. I'm in the United Kingdom. Um, and that's a new program. It's only been going a couple of years now. It's a master's program, and uh, it's brilliant, but it's, as far as I know, pretty much alone. And everywhere else, counselors, if they get any information about this at all, they probably have had to chase it down for themselves. So there have been times when I've had referrals to me, and they've said to me, "But you have to watch out. This person's borderline." Now, I think people are getting a bit better about using that term now, but back in the 90s and 80s, it tended to mean this person's uncooperative. They won't do what I tell them.
Mm.
And I'm sorry, but if you're dealing with somebody who's just come out of an abusive sect, they need to not be expected to do what they're told. They need to rediscover that they can say no.
Exactly.
They need, and they
Non-compliance
need,
can become a feature, not a bug.
exactly. They even need to know that they don't have to say no. They can just do no.
Yep.
And they need to have the freedom to say, well, he's asked me to do X and Y. And then just not talk about it. And then when you ask, how did doing X and Y go? Um, and that should be a cue to you. Normally, it would be a cue to find out why it didn't work and push the subject and get them doing it. But I believe with somebody who's struggling with the aftermath of being in an abusive sect, I think you need to be sensitive really quickly to say, okay, well, let's see if we can do something else that will work for you, and
Yep.
just move on.
Exactly.
Because you can't teach somebody to make their own mind up while you're telling them what to do. It's that whole Scientology thing of we teach you to be self-determinative by doing what we tell you.
Exactly. The key
You
to
know?
self-determinism is doing everything I tell you to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you just can't do that with people.
This is actually super important advice for family and friends as well, because this is not something, if you want to help somebody or yourself get out of one of these situations and recover from it, then claiming ownership of your attention and your communication is crucial. Right. And by that, I mean, you really do get to decide when you want to talk, when you don't want to talk, what you want to say, how and when you want to say it.
Yeah.
In a therapy situation, but also in a social situation, family, friends, etc. You know, recovering this and having, and the reason I'm stressing this is really I'm talking to the family and friends, because they tend to not get this. They think, oh, he's out now, everything's fine.
Back to normal.
Back to normal, exactly.
Yeah.
And no. Please, you know, whoa, stop, air brakes. It's a little bit more complicated than that, you know. So if we can foster this kind of understanding that, you know, that every little bit is helping the person, when you are patient with them, when you are tolerant of their foibles, when you are, you know, compassionate about or empathic or whatever towards their struggle, toward the fact that there is a struggle there of some kind, and everybody's going to be different, so everybody's struggles are going to be different. Some people are going to be a lot more chill than other people, but please trust me when I say to you that no matter how good the social veneer is, and it can be quite good, there's still struggle going on inside. I could be amazingly social for a very long time after Scientology and not really particularly clue people in on what was going on in my head, but it was a struggle.
Well, being in any group, to survive in any extremist group, you have to adopt something of the chameleon about you to blend in.
Yeah.
And especially because there will be things going on that A, you don't understand, or B, you don't like. You don't dare say either of those necessarily. So what do? You adopt protective coloring. Well, that skill doesn't leave you when you come out.
Right.
You come out and you still look around you and you say, I'd better act like this or I'd better act like that, so nobody pays much attention to me and they don't notice that I'm not fitting in. And that can lead to problems until they come to the place where they can say, actually, I don't enjoy that, or actually, I'm not comfortable with this, or really, I'd rather be doing such and such. And that's all part of the recovery process for them to realize it's okay. You don't have to be obnoxious and say, well, that's, you know, that's karmically destructive, or that's whatever the group, you know, that's wicked and sinful, or whatever the group taught them to say. You can simply say, well, that's not for me. And that's okay.
Right.
Or no, thank you. You know.
Exactly. But like, you know, like we're seeing in the comments right now, you know, here's a commenter saying, I wasn't angry about Scientology when I left because I took ownership for all the decisions that I made, including getting in. Pretty forward thinking, you know, because a lot of people aren't up to that when they come out. So it's kind of like you got to deal with what you got in front of you.
Yeah. And that won't work for everybody, because not everybody was in that position. Not everybody did freely decide to get in.
Exactly.
Some people got frightened in by being told, well, your personality test indicates that you are really, really suicidal, and we can help you with that, but you've got to act now. Or they were born in. No decision necessary. They just found themselves, you know, from age dot, they found themselves in a Scientology family or whatever group it was.
Right.
There's no decision there. And so that wouldn't work for them. They have to make different assessments and come to different things. Well, you know, I didn't choose to be born into a Scientology family, or I didn't choose to be born into a family of the followers of Bhagwan Rajneesh, or I didn't choose to be born in this or that. You know,
yeah,
exactly.
I didn't choose it. Everybody's different that way. Second gens especially.
Yeah.
So getting back to boundaries, how do you educate or inform on this topic? Do you bring it up? Do they bring it up? How does that usually work?
Sooner or later, I bring it up normally. I used to be a lot more a lot more mysterious about bringing it up, partly because I was referring to it as self-protection when I did refer to it at all.
Sort of circumspect.
Yes, so I'd refer to it as self-protection or self-definition, which was my favorite term at the time. But I've come to realize I just have to come out and say boundaries, and that's okay. People get what I'm talking about now. I think partly because the word is more in vogue now. People do
Yeah.
talk about it,
Yep.
and if you say that, they may say, oh, come on, or like somebody once, well, on multiple occasions when I've mentioned safe space, and they and they think I'm joking, and I have to explain, well, I don't mean what you think I'm thinking of. I'm actually talking about this. But likewise with boundaries, having to say to people, well, what we're looking at here is the ability to say, this is okay in my immediate life. That stuff out there, I get to decide. And if I decide it's not in my life, it's not in my life. And so don't push me. So other people don't own us, for example. They don't have a right. You're over explaining that you were describing before, that reporting, giving a report. That's an excellent example of what so many people come out doing, because so many groups have this idea that unless you are absolutely transparent and totally honest, telling the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth all the time, you must be lying. You're hiding something. You're deceiving. When they come out of the group, they still have that fear that they are hiding something. They're deceiving. And so they feel that they owe everybody an explanation. Now, that in some cases, in a situation where I'm working with somebody, it can be useful in the sense that they're very forthcoming about what they're struggling with.
Mm-hmm.
That's useful. That cuts down having to see if they want to talk about it. But at the same time, I'm aware that the immediate process is going to need to be regulated so it doesn't harm the long-term process of them sitting back and saying, well, you just asked me a question. I don't really feel like I want to give that information to you, so I'm going to talk about something else. And that's really where I want people. I want them at the place where if I do say, well, last week you were mentioning this problem you were having at your job. Can we, do you feel like updating me on that? And they should feel perfectly okay saying, no, I'd rather not talk about that right now.
Right. And that doesn't have to be
Absolutely
a
fine.
red flag.
It does, exactly. They're not hiding from me. They're not withholding. They're not uncooperative or, anything like that. They're not doing anything except saying, I haven't processed it to the place where I know what I want to tell you. And that's cool. That works absolutely. This idea of telling all. I mean, I can list any number of groups, some of which go back to the days of the hippies, but not all, where in their own buildings, people were expected, not encouraged or allowed, expected to walk around totally naked because you weren't supposed to hide anything. And that was symbolic of not. I even know of groups where they had no doors on any of the rooms in their buildings, including the bathroom and the toilet and the bath, the shower. No doors, because that would be hiding something.
Right. Right.
Um,
We're open.
no,
We have no secrets from one another. We trust each other implicitly,
exactly,
completely.
exactly.
Yeah,
And of
sure.
course, you never licked the envelope on your mail on the rare occasions you wrote a letter to somebody, because why would you want to hide what you're saying to someone?
Right.
And of course, your mail was censored before it was given to you for the same exact reason.
Exactly.
The freedom to say, nope, none of your business. What a wonderful thing to give somebody, the freedom to say, none of your business, even if they say it in the kindest, gentlest way possible. Well, I'd rather not talk about that. Good on you.
That's right. And we have this sort of stigma in society to one degree or another with this. I mean, I mean, very clearly so. People get offended. They feel like, you're withholding from them. You don't trust them. There's some issue. But, and obviously in some cases that is the problem. So, and when one person wants a trust relationship and the other person isn't really feeling it, then that first person can have an issue with that. But that's a whole different thing from what we're talking about right now.
Exactly. Well, see, boundaries, the way I try to explain boundaries when I'm asked is that boundaries are a way that we establish self-respect. I
Yeah,
respect myself enough, or I'm trying to respect myself enough to say I lock my door at night when I go into my home, and I lock my life against people that I don't want getting into the middle of it all, you know?
that's right.
I can invite someone in and I can send them home again.
Exactly. And that power of choice is actually what I was just thinking on there. So I'm glad you just put it that way, because it's that power of choice over who their connections are going to be, over what
Yes.
they are and aren't going to say, that is the important part there. It's not a matter of who they do and don't trust. That can become its own little thing. But we're talking about something even more fundamental, which is the power of choice, the power to decide for themselves where and when they're going to open up and share themselves or be part of some other group or community or relationship or whatever. And if you can't, the thing about being in one of these groups that is really, really important to understand is that it really does break down those boundaries or those ideas, those concepts that you have the right to privacy, that you have the right to have your own identity even. It can come down to something that basic. And no, you don't. In these groups, you do not have those rights. Those rights are stripped from you. That takes a while. And we're talking real core stuff here when it comes to personal identity, but they really are dedicatedly working on breaking down your identity in these groups. This is not a joke. So restoring your identity is really key to that, because it's really foundational to who a person is, that they can make their own decisions.
Yeah. Well, this is the whole thing about self-respect, because self-respect
Yeah,
is ultimately self-definition. It's the right to say, I am this, I am not that. And when I can say to somebody, you can come this far into my life and no further, I am saying who I am in my own eyes includes you in this part of my life, but not in this part of my life.
bingo.
And that's legitimate.
That's right.
That is legitimate. I don't
That's
have to
right.
explain that or excuse it. I don't need your permission. Um, Trust isn't a right. Trust is something you earn. I can like you. That doesn't mean I have to. Doesn't mean I have to utterly trust you.
That's right.
I can trust you a little bit, or more, or a lot, or totally. But that's my decision. You don't get to tell me how much I have to trust you.
Bingo. There we go. That's exactly right. And for the friends and family of the former cult members, it's a matter of rebuilding that trust. It might not even necessarily be a thing where they don't want to trust you. It could very well be they very much want to trust you, but they just can't.
It goes back to
You
what you
know?
said before about betrayal.
Yeah,
Look
that's
how
right.
much they trusted the leader and his minions and his seconds in command and all the rest of the group. Trusted them with their lives, trusted them with their spiritual future or their beingness or whatever it was they trusted them with, and then they were betrayed.
Right.
It's really hard. It's really hard to get back on the horse when you've been not just fallen off, but you've been thrown off
Big time.
violently.
Exactly. And as somebody's saying here, you have to feel that you're safe. That's exactly right, because the betrayal is, here's how I see it breaking down. I'm curious what your take on what I'm about to say is that I think trust has to do with knowing, a feeling of knowing, or a little bit of a certainty, maybe, that you give yourself, that this, let's say we're talking about interpersonal trust here. I'm not talking about trust in a bank, although I guess the same concept applies here, where you're extending the idea or the certainty that this institution, organization, person, group, whatever, is gonna do what they say they're gonna do, and isn't going to do what they tell you specifically that they are not going to do. If they say we're not going to do this, then guess what? They don't do it. If they do say they're going to do this, they're going to be on time, well, they're going to be on time, or they're going to pick you up and they're going to pick you up, or they're going to, talk to you this way, then they're going to talk, then they talk to you that way. Like whatever it is, whatever the agreements are, the trust is really this knowingness that you have, to use that wonderful Scientology noun, knowingness, right? That knowledge you have, better, um,
Mm-hmm.
that this person or thing or group or entity is going to do what they say they're going to do, is not going to do what they say they're not going to do. And you know that. And so I guess I'm making that point so strongly because it gives the family and friends an opportunity to live that. If you want to
Yes.
reestablish trust with this person, you want to help this person out to reacclimate into life, demonstrate, model that behavior. Model trustworthy behavior, and don't
Yeah.
screw with these people. They've already been screwed with.
Yeah.
You got to unscrew with them, which means you got to do exactly what you say you're going to do, not do what what you guys agree you're not going to do. And I think people will find more catharsis and more healing in that than they will in endless hours of talking about it, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I think you've hit on a very important point there, and I think actually we could just lift the next few moments up out of this tape and drop it into tape. What am I talking? Recording. And oh, my age is showing. And drop it into the conversation about helping people to get out.
Yep.
See, one of the things that I guess you could say alienated me a little bit back in the 70s and early 80s was that people were still using the technique of introducing an exit specialist or an interventionist or whatever you want to call them as an old family friend.
Ah, right.
No, 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 no.
Right.
Once you do that, you are acting like the sect.
Yep.
And so, that just put me off. People doing who did that because you want to be distinct from the abuser, and one of the ways to be distinct from the abuser is to not deceive, not to lie, not to manipulate. So that point is not only important in recovery, it's important right from the beginning before the person decides to leave. They need to know if you say, I'm not going to snatch you up off the street and take you to a log cabin in the middle of Idaho and not let you go until you agree to leave your group, then you better not do that. If whatever you're doing, it better be honest and straightforward.
Exactly.
But coming back to our real, our immediate topic of how the boundaries work in recovery, self-identification, self-definition, self-respect, that all feeds into self-ownership. It's getting this idea deep inside yourself when you're recovering that I'm mine. Even if you signed a billion-year contract,
Mm-hmm.
even if you've signed whatever you've signed or agreed whatever you've agreed, you primarily you're the owner of first, the first named owner on the contract. You're the guy, you're the woman who decides. And that's got to be so clear. I don't belong to anyone else just because they love me, or just because they say they love me, or just because they're doing something for me. There's no, whatever gratitude I might feel for that relationship, it doesn't include ownership or part ownership.
Right.
So that's also an inherent in the idea of of boundary. And that all takes me around to say that nobody is so necessary in my life that I cannot or should not hold them at a distance or even push them out altogether if they become dangerous to me.
Mm.
I'm not so indebted to anyone that if they become abusive, I have to just take the abuse because I owe them. So all of those things are when I get to talking with people about boundaries, those are the kind of things I like to talk to them about now because I know, maybe not all of them in everybody, but I know a lot of those points are going to hit the target for different people. At some point, they're going to feel like, well, the guru enlightened me and opened my third eye. I have to be faithful and obedient. I shouldn't talk about the group.
Yep.
My goodness, the number of people that say I shouldn't tell you what the group is really like because I owe them because of X and Y. It's, no, you don't. whatever they
It's a
dictate.
weird calculation, isn't it? This loyalty calculation. It's one that well, certain people really seem to really get a kick out of using as a motivational button against people. You're disloyal. You aren't loyal to us, right?
Yes.
This is a real manipulator, and because what does that really mean? What are they saying?
They're
You know,
saying loyalty works in one way and betrayal can work in the other direction toward you.
that's right. That's
They can
right. In
betray
other words,
you.
if you're not loyal, there will be consequences of, okay, well then you will be betrayed or whatever, you will be done to. And so you
I
get
think
this
another,
tit for tat sort of weird thing going on. I think that's when things get really
yeah,
nasty.
yeah. And I think another thing that this feeds into is for the ex-member himself or herself, and for the family and friends around the ex-member to realize the ex-member may make mistakes. He's learning a new skill. She's learning a new skill. They're learning or relearning to take control of themselves, to take charge of themselves, to own themselves and define themselves, and to establish their boundaries. Who's ever done that, even without being in an extremist sect? Who's ever done that and never made a mistake?
Yeah, of course.
Who hasn't excluded somebody accidentally or on wrong impressions? We've all done it, as far as I can see, and then had to say, "Gosh, I made a mistake. You weren't a disloyal person. You were actually my friend in that mess, and now I've got to catch up with you." So we have to expect that, if we're the ex-member, we have to expect we're going to make mistakes and misjudgments of people because we're still trying to untangle all the garbage we learned in the sect. And if we're the family or friends of them, we have to recognize they're still struggling to figure out, how do I evaluate my relationships when I'm not using the teaching in the sect to make those evaluations?
Hmm.
That's a learning process. And we make mistakes when we learn. That's how we learn.
There you go.
Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. I hope it makes sense to everybody else as well. I mean, and of course, and everybody, we're human. We're only human.
Yeah.
What has been, let me anecdote time. What has been the most difficult boundary type situation you've had to deal with? Just kind of curious personally, actually. And how did you help the person overcome it?
That's a good question, mainly because off the top of my head, I'm not sure I can answer that.
Okay.
Off the top of my head. I'm trying to rifle through some 40 odd years of
Yes.
memory. And my memory isn't what it was 40 odd years ago.
Well, what
let's
comes
see.
to mind when I ask you that?
Sorry?
What comes to mind when I
The
ask you that?
immediate thing that comes to mind was somebody who was in a situation where the group they were in, the abuse they were in, was very strongly about sexual abuse. And when they left that, or when they began to leave that, they had no sense of sexual boundaries. And, they explained that when they went hitchhiking, they felt they were obliged to offer sex to whomever gave them a ride. When they
Wow.
went to parties, when they went to parties, they just assumed that was obligatory. They'd been invited to a party. They owed it to the people in the party to be of sexual service.
Wow.
And yeah, that was definitely difficult, because explaining to somebody without, the difficulty there is helping a person to see that they don't belong to anybody in any sense, and that obligation doesn't work like that, because they've been conditioned that way from quite a young age.
I'm glad I
And
asked you about that, because it is a literal meaning of, this is that's an example where you're taking it literally, that you do not own your own body, even that you do not,
exactly.
have even that much is not up to you. And that's, wow. That is real slavery right there. You know,
Yes,
mental
it is.
slavery.
It is. And the trick there is to get the person to make their own conclusion that there's another way of looking at themselves. And this actually feeds into another aspect of things, which is that when you ask me about something that's nearly universal in groups, and it's the tendency towards black and white thinking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this binary approach that either this or that, there's good and there's bad, there's nothing in between.
Yep.
One of the things I do routinely with people is try to encourage them to think of at least two options rather than just one, for that reason. But coming back to this, getting the person to start asking themselves questions. What are the different ways that I can respond? A, to the inner pressure to be sexually available and that they had learned from teenage years, and B, to respond to external pressures of expectation from other people. What are the alternative ways of responding to that? To get them thinking along those lines, and at the same time, not to incorporate aspects of guilt and shame. And when those aspects came up from within them, to enable them to say, well, you know, I was doing what I was taught. I didn't choose it. I learned it. And I was made to learn it. And then eventually come to the place of seeing that if I was looking back on it and chose to keep going on in that course of action deliberately, knowing what I know now, that would be a different story. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is saying, I don't want to live that way anymore. How do I deal with that sense of obligation? So that in fact, they were doing the best they knew at the time. Now they know better, and they're still trying to do the best they can with what they know now. So that the sense of guilt and horribleness that they have about themselves is diffused by the realization they're doing the best. They are trying to undo what they don't like in their lives. You know, it's one thing making a mistake when you don't know that it's a mistake. It's another thing looking back and saying, gee, I think that was a mistake. I wish I weren't still doing it, but then carrying on doing it. That there's a different level of responsibility there. And this person was trying so hard to get out of themselves that sense I'm still obliged.
Mm-hmm.
And working with their emotions at that level, getting them to plug into what the emotions are involving that, and getting them to realize that when you make a choice to do the right thing, you don't need to be ashamed of yourself for trying to do what's right.
Damn good point.
Because
How long?
they'd actually learned to be ashamed. Let me just finish this.
Oh yeah,
They'd
yeah.
learned to be ashamed. They'd learned to be ashamed when they wanted to say no, because they weren't being kind to other people. They weren't
Right.
they weren't serving other people. They weren't being generous. And so shame was actually attached to trying to say no
Right.
to sexual advances.
Right.
So that's what I was trying to say there.
No, and I know I get it. Jesus, man. How long did it take to undo that?
Best part of a year.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Undoing the outward behavior, getting them to say, I will try acting this way instead of that way and see how it feels. I will try acting this new way on the basis that I'm choosing it, not that on the basis that it feels great. And then I will try to look at how I feel and understand where that feeling came from. And then I will look at how I feel when I successfully choose this other way of behaving. And I will reorient myself to these new feelings of, gee, I can say no. I don't have to do something I don't like. And going through all that process of being able to say no and enjoy saying no and feel validated in that enjoyment rather than guilty, that took about a year.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure in a way it could have gone faster if their lives had been different, but you know, their lives weren't different, and we had to work within process their life.
No, and that's
So
the
they
thing. And that's the thing. It's going to take time.
they
There's
controlled the behavior rather rapidly. Once they realized I'm allowed to say no, that worked really quickly.
yeah,
It
but
was
it was
getting to the place. Yes, it was
yeah,
the emotions. It was getting to the place where they didn't feel guilty for saying no.
exactly.
That took that year
That's
of
right.
being able to say,
That's
why
that.
should I?
Well, that was not so dissimilar. I mean, different behavior, but again, just another analogy of changing behavior versus changing what's going on in your head.
Mm.
Um, it took me less than a year to start taking time off to practice not having, having downtime, to not working frantically all the time, that I was doing as a Sea Org member. And even for a year coming out of Scientology, it was like frantic, frantic, frantic. Start getting this idea that I can start calmly relaxing and maybe taking some time and watch some TV and listen to some radio, and it's okay. 5 years
That sounds about
before
right.
it was actually okay in my head. Really okay. Totally guilt-free experience. No even little twinges in the back of my head anymore. Actually, let's say 6 years on that one, where there was literally no more guilt connected with sitting and watching TV on a Saturday night or a Monday night. Even after I put in my work day, I'm in here in my office, I'm working away, I'm not a slacker, and I take off at 5 o'clock like everybody else, and I go watch TV. And it took years before I wasn't guilt tripping myself about that. It was a steady, slow, gradual thing with lots of ups and downs and big peaks and valleys in between. But that's what it can take.
Yeah.
It is not, oh, everything's back to normal now. I just want to keep stressing that, because I know a lot of people
It's
who
worthwhile.
are watching my content, are either former members who have had to go through this themselves and perhaps have been wondering about the normalcy of their recovery or how normal they are, or the friends and family of people who have come out of these groups who really need to understand that it is a process.
Yes. Yes.
Getting folks out of this mind space. Really, you're recovering from a kind of mind virus, I guess you could say, and recovery from that you might be on the ventilator for a little while. You might need some assisted breathing for a little while. You might need some help.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
this all feeds back into this idea of that we were talking about at the end of the last week, I guess it was. How time flies. Of
it
rediscovering.
was 2 weeks ago.
Was it 2 weeks? Okay, well, that makes me feel better. Thank you.
Yes.
This idea of discovering that we can live a normal life and be normal, ordinary.
Yep.
Without ordinary being a dirty word.
That too. Whole saving the world thing.
Saving the world.
You mean I'm not Superman?
Yeah.
What?
Being invincible. All that kind of thing that almost becomes second nature. I mean, I've talked to people who were in various groups where they believed they couldn't get sick, or where they believed that they couldn't have accidents, or where they believed that they were somehow, but their group was going to get together and they were going to do this particular exercise twice a day, and it was going to prevent a comet or a meteor or something crashing into the earth, or all these different kinds of things that they thought, well, I've got to do this, otherwise the earth will be destroyed. And then they leave the group. So now they're not only not super people anymore, but they are slackers, to use that word. Right. They're letting the world
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're letting the world down, man. And
all those people who don't know any better, you're letting them down. You're failing.
That's right. No, believe me, it's true. The guilt is real. The struggle is real. It's true.
And the emotions are very painful.
Very much so. Very much so. So, I want to move toward wrapping up. We've been having a great talk here as usual, and I wanted to ask, again, covering more of what we've been, we've talked about a wide range of things in the last couple of weeks here about recovery, important points or milestones or steps you're trying to take with the person in order to, to help them along. while at the same time, this is not a guided program you're running people through. It's every person's individual and they kind of need what they need. So, but you do have certain goals, of course, like reacclimation, communication, reestablishing trust, stuff like that, like we're talking about here. Do you think that there is any kind of regimen or program of some kind that might be a one size fits all in some fashion in any framing, or is it really just individual for everybody?
A, if there is, I haven't found it yet.
Yeah.
B, I haven't looked all that hard because, just historically speaking, I had to start where I was and do what I could with what I had. And I just found it easier, for whatever reason, I found it easier to relate to people on the basis of what they presented at the time. I wasn't initially looking to do anything big, and I wasn't even looking to be doing it all that long. But 5 years became 10 years, became 20, and now look at me. I'm kind of stuck in a rut. But it's a very nice rut, and I meet all the best people, which is even better. So I guess you could say I haven't been hunting for the magic bullet, but I do think, first of all, I think one of the things that I do with everyone is to try to inform them and educate them alongside of all this other stuff I've been describing, because what we've been talking about a lot is the emphasis on the emotional healing that has to take place, but there also has to be the information. So yes, I do ask them to read things. I do encourage them to watch certain things, including your channel on YouTube or wherever. I do have them read John's book on opening minds. I do encourage them to read sometimes just chapters or portions of books that might be relevant to them. I do share information in other ways, and I ask loads of questions. Usually, the point of the questions is to make them think about a subject that they tend not to think about, and sometimes that's because you're not encouraged to think about those things in most groups. So even a simple question like, what would I like to become if I could be anything? Some groups, that's not so challenging, but for some people, well, that's not my decision.
Right.
Okay, well, it is now. Or what do I enjoy? I used to, again, this was one of the things I was very circumspect about and very roundabout in the earlier days, and I've become more and more upfront about, what do you enjoy doing? Have you ever read poetry? Have you ever listened to poetry being performed? Do you like it? Do you read novels? Do you read other kinds of books? Do you like it? Movies, music, whatever. Do you like just seeing what other people do, or do you like trying your own hand at writing or painting or sculpting or whatever? What if you went, I don't know, what if you went on a night course and learned how to throw pottery? How would you feel about that? So asking questions like, what would you enjoy, that has no literal value to it. No, I can tick that off as an accomplishment. I can say, right, I've now, that's me getting a stat. Just encouraging people to rediscover themselves, because it's in rediscovering themselves that they become more proof against other groups. To me, it's an important thing. If you can say, I absolutely know I don't like doing this and don't want to be doing it and don't want somebody to talk me into doing it, that's a really good way to say, nope, that group doesn't appeal to me. I can think about it. It's not the only thing, and it's not even maybe the biggest thing, but as we get to know ourselves, we find the joy of being ourselves. We find pleasure in it. We start saying, yeah, I'm the guy that goes to rock concerts, or I'm the guy that goes and sits on the bank and fishes for 3 hours every weekend, or whatever it is that we discover about ourselves. And that makes us more secure in ourselves. And when some wise guy guru comes along and says, you don't know yourself, I can give you, no, mate, I know who I am.
Yeah.
What else you got to tell? Nothing? Okay, I'm gone.
Yeah, exactly.
See what I mean?
No, I definitely do.
So it's in asking people those kinds of questions and as I say, side by side, giving them the information. How did you get talked into this? What kind of things were going on in the group? And noticing those little forms of manipulation and understanding how manipulation works and understanding, well, it's a whole other subject. And we keep doing this. We get to the end of
Oh, we got a
I'm
whole
just gonna-
nother thing to talk about. Yeah.
I'll just say this, and this is something I keep coming back to. There's a popular myth that either you completely choose freely or you're somehow magically brainwashed or manipulated or something's done to you and you become a zombie. And I prefer to think in terms of this whole range of different ways of influence, some of which are valid, some of which are inappropriate, and some of which are downright manipulative. The invalid and inappropriate and improper use of normal methods of communication in order to have an effect, which is usually to get you to do what I want. So getting people to understand a bit more about how that works and freeing them from the black and white of you were either choosing freely or you were totally brainwashed and you became a zombie. There's more to it than that. If it were just that simple, recovery would be a whole lot easier.
Yeah, exactly.
It's when people are lured in to a misunderstanding of reality that then makes them choose the obvious course of action. You know, if L. Ron Hubbard really was the most brilliant man who ever lived, who gave us this perfect technology, then being a Scientologist is the only rational thing to do. If he wasn't a pathological liar, if he wasn't a narcissist and a blowhard, if he didn't lie about pretty much everything he taught, then it all would make sense. But once you see that there are these other alternative ways of looking at what he's said, and there's evidence to back it up, then you have to ask other questions.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
No, good point. Very good. And drawing the person out, really what we're talking about there with those kind of questions and with that kind of an approach is, let's get this, as Hassan would talk about in Combating Cult Mind Control, it's bringing that original personality back to the fore and bringing it out into the open again and making it safe for that person to be who they really are rather than having to put these walls of cult personality up. Might be
And
another way.
recognizing that the original personality isn't a static thing.
Exactly. That's
The
right.
real person in there is constantly growing and looking to grow,
That's right.
is constantly struggling with what's going on in their environment. And if given a different environment, will grow differently.
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
Well, Christian, thank you very much for your time here, man. I really appreciate it.
it's my pleasure.
Yeah, it's always fun. And I think these live streams have been interesting. I got to tell everybody out there, it's not that I don't see all your questions, but you know, I'm not doing a Q&A necessarily. So if the question's wildly off topic of what we're talking about, I can't incorporate it into our conversation, and I'm not going to try. So I've got a weekly Q&A show, and I'm very keen to answer your questions. So please do go ahead and throw them out to me, or email them to me at askchrisshelton@gmail.com, so I can get them in my weekly Q&A show, and I'll be happy to answer them there. Obviously, with topics or comments that have, or with comments or questions that have been right on the line of what we've been talking about, I try to incorporate those into the conversation. And some of these comments have been absolutely wonderful. And thank you very much, guys, who have been throwing those up there. Really, really good stuff. So that all being said, I think we will wrap this up. Did you have, let's see, just to remind everybody, we can find you on Twitter. Yes, Christian?
Dialogue Center UK. Oh gosh, could you put a link down there, because the spelling will have
Yes.
people wandering around the internet forever.
Aw, thank you, Shimoda, for that awesome comment. And Christian, yes, I will get your Twitter handle, Dialogue Center UK, in the comments or the description section of the video here. Awesome, man. You guys are awesome. All right, let's go ahead and wrap this up. I will go over to my YouTube settings and boom. Bye-bye, guys.